Okay, so let's start learning some of the tools inside of Photoshop. So to get going, we'll create a new document. Let's go to the File, New menu. And if you remember from the previous video, first thing we want to do is ensure we're in the correct units. So let's start with pixels. And for this demonstration, let's just set it to 1000 by 1000 pixels. And please ensure that your resolution is at 72 pixels per inch. We want to avoid any issues by setting something that is too high. Okay, so with the new document open, we have our canvas nice and big, and it has 1000 pixels and 1000 pixels for us to work with. So I'm going to start with the brush tool. So the brush tool looks like a paintbrush, but be careful because there are a few things that look like a paintbrush here. So this one over here is not the brush tool, it is the quick selection tool. This one, where is it? Down here is also not the brush tool. It's this one over here. And this is leading me to tell you about keyboard shortcuts. So you see, as I leave my mouse over a tool, this little tooltip pops up, and inside it you can see brush tool and the letter B. So that letter there in brackets is telling you what the keyboard shortcut is. So you don't even need to come over here and use your mouse to access it. You can click the letter B on your keyboard to activate it. So you see I just pressed the letter B and it automatically activated this tool. And just a little thing about these tools in general, there's a little triangle here, and that's indicating that there are actually more tools. This is a group of tools. So you can access all the tools that are grouped with this tool two ways. So you can right click and you'll see the complete set of tools pop up. Be warned if you're on a Mac at the Mac Lab, um, the right click is not enabled by default. So you might have to use a control click. So you hold the control button on your keyboard and then you click, and that is a right click. And the other way to open up these tools is by clicking and holding. So let me get out. So if you just click and hold the mouse down, you will pop out the tool group. So that is the case for all of these tools. If you click and hold, or if you right click, you will see all the groups that are hidden next to them. So let's start with the brush tool. And using the brush tool, we have to know a few things. We need to know how to manipulate our brush, and we need to know what colors we are using. So in terms of colors, you'll find the color palettes over here. So this area at the bottom of the tools shows you the foreground and the background color. So right now I have a gray set up in the foreground color. That's the patch, the square that is in front of us. And I have a white set up as the background color. That's the patch that is behind. So if I were to start clicking and dragging with the mouse, I will start drawing with the foreground color. So now if you want to switch colors, well, there's a few ways. And that's typically the case in Photoshop. There are many ways to do things. So one way is click on this swatch over here. I'm going to click on the gray foreground color, and it pops up this color picker. Let me bring it so you can see it. There we go. So this is a pretty advanced dialog window, and I will cover it in a little bit of detail right now. So this area is showing us the hue um, along with other things. So if you want to change the color or the hue, you would use this bar over here. So by clicking or clicking and dragging inside this area, you will adjust the hue for the selection area on the left. And then the second step is to actually click in this area to select a new color. You can click or you can click and drag. Sometimes clicking and dragging is actually helpful because if you want to get that color in the corner, it's very hard to click on it, but it's much easier to click and drag and then slide your mouse towards the corner. This area over here, it's pretty cool. It's showing us a preview of the new color and it's comparing it to the current color so you can see the differences. And I'm not going to go into this area over here that is quite daunting with all these numbers, but I will give you a quick introduction into color modes, and that's what this is. It's showing you the color uh, based in different color modes. So if you look at this area over here, that's CMYK color mode. So you have 4 values that set the color. You have another one here. I don't even remember what that is. I think something to do with luminosity. Another one is over here, RGB. So that you might be more familiar with. RGB, it's the way light kind of mixes together to create new colors. When we talk about colors, we'll get into more of that theory. But basically using the 3 primary colors, you're mixing them together in different proportions, and you could create any color. So you might notice as I start changing these colors, the numbers start to change. And let's go into the example of red. So if I were to take the most red possible, you see the G and the B are starting to decrease, and I am at the maximum now of the red. So this color here has full red and it has 0 green and blue. And that's why we're seeing this very strong red color. And there's another color mode here I'm not going to get into, but this one is useful to start looking at. It's the hex code. So um, this is also showing different color channels mixing together, but it's using a fancy hexadecimal notation on it. And that is what we call the hex code. And it is used quite often, especially in web production. But anyways, we don't need to worry about that right now. For now, I just want you to start using your eyes and choosing a color that suits your fancy, and that's it. So choose the color and then push OK, and that will load up your color palette in the foreground color that we chose, and you can start painting with it. Other ways to set the foreground color is in the panel over here. Here's the color panel, and you can use it in the same way as this color picker that we popped up before, except it's just a little bit quicker because it's on the interface in the panel, and you don't need to pop up the dialog window with an extra click. And another very, very useful panel is this swatches panel here. You might have noticed as I clicked on those colors that these kind of moved around. So if I were to switch it to a red now, so I just clicked on this red color and the new swatch appeared. So this is giving us our history of the colors that we have chosen, which is very useful because it would be very impossible to switch back and forth between colors and match them perfectly the way I just showed you. So if you go into the history over here, you can easily trace back to a previous color and load it up. And finally, in this panel is a group of swatches inside each a folder. So if you click on a folder to expand it, you have to click on this little arrow over here. It's going to open this swatch group. This is the RGB group, so it contains colors related to that. This is a newer feature of Photoshop where they actually don't show you the swatch, but they're grouped into these folders. Personally, I don't like it so much, but there is some benefit to it when you start working with swatches. So keep that in mind. So there I have it. 3 different ways to change your foreground color. And like I said, there's many different ways to do things inside of Photoshop. Some other stuff. Let's talk about the brush tip now. So we loaded up the brush tool over here, and that means the brush options became available to us over here. So take note, we're going to skip over this one over here and this one over here. And this one over here, so it's like the third button, is where we could get into the brush tip. So I'm going to click on this over here and pop up the brush tip options. So this is very cool because it gives you many different ways to change the stroke that you're creating as you draw through the brush tip. So you can change the brush size by dragging this slider. So let's increase this to something pretty obviously big and start painting. And you see brush size is much bigger. So go ahead and experiment with that. You can also change the brush hardness. So this option over here in the brush tip changes how the edge behaves. So right now I have a very low hardness close to 0%. And that's why the stroke I created is faded at the edges. So this is what we call a soft brush because the color at the edge of the brush fades softly into nothingness. Whereas if we were to increase this value to maximum hardness, for example, now we're at 100%, let's show you the difference. So do you see the edges of this stroke? How it's very, very abrupt going from the foreground color to nothing? So that's a hard edge, whereas this is a soft edge right next to it. Let's go back to this panel. Here we have different presets. So you're seeing this repeat itself like we had with colors. So you have these folders, and inside it, you have a bunch of different brush tips. So you can have fun exploring that, but be careful. I would recommend for now that you experiment playing with the brush size and the brush hardness. Don't worry too much about this area over here. Now, coming over here to change the brush tip is take some time. So I'm going to always be giving you different options that allow you to work faster inside of Photoshop. So for example, instead of coming up here, you can simply keep your mouse on the canvas and right click. So as long as your brush tool is active and you right click, it's going to pop up this panel for you and it is more accessible. When you're done, press the enter button on your keyboard and it will go away. Okay, avoid the temptation to click over here outside to get rid of it, because what you're going to do, the click is going to start a new brush stroke. So that's that. And another way to change your brush hardness, okay, because if you think about it, changing the brush size this way is actually difficult. As I increase the brush size, what does 185 pixels actually mean? Maybe it's useful for you in some situations, but usually when you're just painting intuitively with your eyes, that number isn't very helpful. What is helpful is actually seeing the brush. So what I recommend is that you learn the keyboard shortcut. So instead of using that panel to change the brush size, okay, there are keyboard shortcuts that allow you to do these things faster and better. So it's the square brackets. So the square brackets are next to the letter P on your keyboard. So I'm going to use it now so you see it. So you see as I press this key, the brush size is decreasing, and then the right-hand side of the square bracket will cause it to increase. So this is faster. You don't have to deal with that window popping up, and it's also better because you can actually see the size of the brush. So if I want to do something a little more interesting, maybe change the color and decrease and decrease and so on. You see how this gets to be a lot more faster to do your work. Other ways to draw with the brush, a little trick over here. Don't worry if you don't absorb this all, but it's cool to see this as it might come back later and it will ring a bell when we do. So I'm just going to change my color. Try this with me. I want you to click and then hold the mouse down while you press the shift key on your keyboard. So I'm going to click and hold the mouse down and press the shift on my keyboard and then start to paint. And you'll see no matter where I move my mouse, I am locked in that direction that I have painted. So I'll do that again. I'm going to click, keep the mouse down, hold the shift button on my keyboard and start moving. And you'll see I am now locked in that direction. So you can do this up and down, left and right, and I believe you could even do it diagonal. No, not diagonal. So for other orientations, I'm going to show you a different way right now. Let's change the color. And what you do is click once to set the origin, hold shift, and then click again to connect the line. So once again, click to set the first origin, hold shift, and then click again to create the stroke. So this allows you to do some pretty cool stuff. You can have fun with this. And you could even continue. So if I hold Shift and keep the Shift button down, you'll see how it will keep connecting these lines together. All right, so I made a mess. What do we do now? Well, in the real world, it might be difficult to deal with this, but in Photoshop world, we have the eraser. Okay, so to find the eraser, press the letter E on your keyboard, okay, and that will pop up the eraser. And then you can see it in the toolbar, and you will know what the icon is in case you want to find it again with the mouse. So that's the eraser right here. And the key with the eraser is um, it's actually secretly painting with the background color. So the background color is white right now. So if I were to click and drag with it, you see it's erasing, but what it's really doing is painting white. So this is true because we have a background layer that is locked, and that is the behavior of the eraser when you have a locked background layer. When we start working with additional layers, this behavior changes a little bit, but we'll come to that later. So that might give you a bit of a hint. The eraser is exactly like the paintbrush. So because it's exactly like the paintbrush, you actually have access to the brush tips over here, just like we did before. So the eraser has its own set of brush tips, and you can change the size and the hardness and do the same things that we did with the paintbrush. So I'm going to reduce the hardness to show you this effect and press enter. I'm going to use my keyboard shortcuts just to make it bigger and just to show you the soft edge of this brush as I'm erasing. Let me go ahead and make the brush hard again. And remember, press the enter button to accept your changes. And then I'm going to make the brush really, really big. See, it's the eraser, but I called it the brush because, it behaves the same way. It's just another brush. And then I did some quick cleanup to erase everything on the canvas. And just to avoid scaring myself later, I'm just going to reduce the brush size. So that's all I have to say about the paintbrush and the eraser for now. Already at your disposal, you have a lot of fun stuff you could do inside of Photoshop. And I will stop this video and start a new one for working with the paint bucket and possibly the gradient.